Thank you all very much. That's just a great welcome, and welcome to you all. I'd like to invite you tonight to listen to my talk, not as a monologue that's being recorded, but as the first step in a dialogue that we can continue later. And the reason, in part, is that what I want to persuade you of is that dialogical reasoning is essential to artificial intelligence and its future, and to a human ecological approach to creating a wiser Earth. Okay? So, to begin with, let me note that people are currently spending literally trillions of dollars to make this a smarter planet. Smart phones, smart cars, smart farms, smart schools, smart battlefields. What I want to suggest or invite you to consider is the possibility that what we really need is not just smarter systems, but wiser systems. Now, what do I mean by that? And how might artificial intelligence play a role in creating wiser systems on this planet? Well, smarter systems are ones that are designed to take one or a few values and maximize them, optimize them. So in the case of a farm, it might be maximize tons of soybeans per hectare that are produced. Or in a school, optimize the advance in reading, writing, and arithmetic to test scores, okay? But schools and farms serve lots of other functions. For example, farms provide oxygen that we breathe through the plants they grow, and aquifers for water that we drink, and habitat for birds and for pollinators. And schools provide places for kids to form their character, to form friendships, to form a cultural identity, to have cultural centers, to have a safe harbor where they can be while their parents are working. Okay? So what we really want with our life systems is to take all the different kinds of values that are relevant to the functions of those systems and deal with them in a balanced way. That's what a wiser system would be, a human ecological approach to taking them all into account. And part of what we need to figure out is how to get AI to serve appropriately in helping with that kind of process. Okay? Now, since the 18th century, and before, people have been aiming at thinking about reasoning as a form of linear inference. And most AI research now comes out of a STEM education framework, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, that assumes that formal logic epitomizes rationality. Linear inference, where you start with some premises, and then you have an algorithmic rule that yields some conclusions, right? And by an algorithmic rule, I mean something like modus ponens, or what's called affirming the antecedent, where you start with premises like A, if Socrates is a man, then Socrates is mortal. And premise B, Socrates is a man. And the conclusion C, can anybody guess? Socrates is mortal, right? Okay. That kind of linear inference has been used not just in economics and engineering and so on, but also in ethics. Since the 18th century, utilitarians and Kantians have been discussing, debating, trying to decide ethical issues using that kind of linear reasoning. And it's also the case that nowadays people are trying to use that kind of reasoning to, for example, write code for self-driving cars that might face situations like the famous trolley car dilemma. Let me give you an example of a particular dilemma that might be illuminating here. Imagine that you have a healthcare system, maybe it's an insurance company or a hospital, and they're trying to program a computer, or a consultant working for them is trying to anticipate the best decision in the following situation. You've got a surgeon, and she has 4 patients that each need life-saving organ transplants: heart, liver, kidneys, so on. In her waiting room, there's a patient who's a healthy young man, right, who has happened to fall asleep. So she considers, should I anesthetize him and harvest his organs so that I can save my other 4 patients, right? Now, a utilitarian consultant or computer might argue, if an action promotes the greatest net happiness to all concerned, then choose it. And sacrificing the one to save the many promotes the greatest net happiness to all concerned. So sacrifice the one to save the many, right? A Kantian, or somebody of another frame of mind, drawing on a principle like the categorical imperative, might start with a different kind of premise, something like, if you can't will an action or policy from the point of view of everyone concerned and affected by it, then you shouldn't will it. And second premise, you can't will the sacrifice of the napping patient from the point of view of the napping patient, and so you should not choose that as an option, right? Well, so this kind of basic structure of reasoning, where you start with premises, use an algorithmic rule, and generate conclusions, if it's the only conception of rationality that we have, then we're condemned to think of rationality as something that's monological, one-sided, right? Something that one person or computer can do solo, right? But we're also stuck in a situation in which if there's more than one set of basic starting premises that conflict, then we end up in dilemmas, what to do, what to choose, right? And even moral relativism kind of comes out of it. Fortunately, I hope you're expecting this, there's a solution to this, right? Because there's another notion of rationality, which is what we could call dialogical reasoning, okay? In the case of the doctor, she could start a conversation, a dialogue, with the patients who are going to die anyway, if they don't get an operation, and consider what are their options. Maybe one of them would volunteer to sacrifice their healthy organs to save the others, because they're going to die anyway. Maybe one of them would do this out of a sense of heroism, or maybe the group could support them, or maybe they have a lottery. You would open a dialogue about it to see where the conversation would go, right? And this kind of dialogical reasoning is something that's been studied extensively in the last 50 years by anthropologists, by people in peace studies. They've looked at negotiation, mediation, group problem solving, communal discernment. They've looked at peacemaking, conflict transformation, right? And they found a number of key strategies for pursuing dialogical reasoning in increasingly more effective ways, right? One of the strategies is the one that was there in the doctor's conversation I just mentioned. If you face a dilemma, multiply your options, right? Another strategy that they've found that's widely used is if someone's insisting on a particular option and not very open to negotiating about it, explore why they're so fixed on it. What are their underlying interests? Why? Because that may open them up and open you up to seeing other options and possibilities that could advance the dialogue, okay? Now, the thing about these two principles and others that they find is that they're not algorithms. They don't provide determinate rules that give you a determinate conclusion or result. They don't tell you what the option's going to be or what the underlying interest is. They say, go look for it, right? They provide strategies for open-ended conversation, right? And the structure of reasoning, then, is really different from logical inference. It begins not with one set of assumptions, but with two or more people that disagree about their basic premises, that don't agree on their basic definitions, that even literally see the world differently, right? And the process of reasoning involves them beginning to negotiate that, to come to terms with each other, to find common ground for premises they can reason with. And through that process of negotiation, to try to arrive at step 3, which is genuine voluntary agreement, okay? And let me just note that there are two kinds of basic strategies that you can use to advance dialogical reasoning in general, and I want to mention this in my short talk here tonight. One is to avoid the mistakes of what's often called the golden rule. That's the rule that says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's often presented as the basis of all ethics across cultures. But think about it for a minute. What this rule really invites you to do is to be egocentric, ethnocentric, to think like a colonizer. It invites me to ask myself, what are my values, and then impose them on everybody else. Treat them the way I would like to be treated. what I'd like to suggest is that for genuine dialogue, you need to follow a different kind of rule. You could call it the rainbow rule, where you do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Now, this again is not an algorithm. It doesn't immediately tell you what to do in an individual case. For one thing, you have to enter into dialogue to find out what they would want, what their point of view in the world is, right? But more than that, if there's more than one of them, they'll often disagree amongst themselves, which will call for some dialogue. And they may even individually disagree with themselves over time. They may initially have a view that on reflection, when they think about equality or respect for others or ecological sustainability, maybe on reflection they'll decide what they thought they wanted is not what they would really want, right? So what the rainbow rule, or maybe we should call it the rainbow framework, really offers is a general way of framing yourself towards open-ended dialogue, okay? The second basic kind of thing that helps advance dialogue is to approach it in a human ecological way in which you draw on all the different kinds of intelligence that are relevant and available, right? And there are lots of different kinds of intelligences. You know, there's, visual intelligence, there's geometric intelligence, there's algebraic intelligence, there's emotional intelligence, there's social intelligence, there's kinesthetic intelligence, right? All these different kinds, right? Let me give you an example. Imagine a school system where some kind of crisis has happened, and they got lots of kids who are troubled and in trauma, right? Well, you definitely want to have some people to help them out. Parents, teachers, counselors. They could bring social intelligence, as well as a variety of others to help the kids out. But now, it might also be likely that, especially in a big school system, that you'd have a lot of management to handle, a lot of cases to keep track of, a lot of appointments, a lot of scheduling, right? And that kind of thing, managing large bodies of data, numbers, is something that spreadsheets and machines are pretty good at, right? And so you may want to be using some machine intelligence as well. But now notice further, it may turn out that for a kid who's traumatized, that the most intelligent and helpful sort of entity may be an emotional support dog, right? So animals, maybe even plants, can have forms of intelligence that we should also be including in the mix as we try to negotiate, solve problems, collaborate in the dialogue to move us towards a wiser decision, a wiser process, right? And part of the challenge is to figure out how to include AI in all that in effective ways. And increasingly large language models are providing interesting ways of beginning to do that kind of thing, especially when they're hybridized with other kinds of more transparent systems or ones that actually can do things in the world, like robotic devices and stuff. Let me give you an example of one of the ways in which this kind of stuff is happening now. There's a book, The Sounds of Life by Karen Baker. Fascinating. It's a study of bioacoustics and the work just in the last 5 to 10 years especially, where they've been finding that by using ever cheaper and ever more effective forms of microphones and speakers, they can get out in nature and detect ultrasound and infrasound, and as well as all the stuff that we can normally hear. And they can also start to decipher it using large language model styles of artificial intelligence. They can decode it, right? And so they're discovering all sorts of things about the communication between elephants, whales, bats, turtles. Who knew turtles used sound to communicate? I didn't, right? They're honeybees. They're discovering all this kind of stuff, right? In effect, they're developing a kind of Google Translate for the zoological world that increasingly is going to include us in a kind of inner network of beings, right? So that's part of what's coming along in ways that we can include AI in the ways we try to collaborate in natural systems and human ecology. But there's some challenges that remain, obviously. There's lots of them. And one key one I want to mention now is that currently with large language models, the way folks in AI doing research are trying to design them focuses on predicting what it is that people will say or do, right? Descriptively, right? Whereas with genuine dialogue, we've got to think about what we ought to say and do, right? Something that researchers in AI, especially STEM background folks, are just beginning to do, right? Fortunately, we've got, as I mentioned, this 50 years of research that's being ignored largely so far in AI that provides ways of doing this, strategies for entering into dialogue that includes all the kinds of intelligences involved and open-ended kinds of strategies. So now, what's my take home for you all, right? Well, first, look for some life systems that you really care about and that you're involved in. And ask yourself, how is AI already entering in, or how is it likely to soon? Okay? And then secondly, learn about how dialogical forms of reasoning can be used to try and improve the processes in which machine intelligences and different kinds of human intelligences and different kinds of animal and plant and fungi, rhizomes, intelligences can all be incorporated, right? And then third, find some partners. Partner with some people to start dialogue and action. And if you do this right, if you look and learn and partner with people in dialogue and action, then in years to come, you're going to be thanking each other. Just the way that tonight I would like to thank you all for coming here and giving me the time to listen to my attempt to start all this dialogue with you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.